Well, hi everybody. Fantastic. Can I just say thank you for coming out and coming out this evening to this bookshop to talk about this book called Purged, which let me tell you a little quick bit about it. It was about 5 or 6 years ago when I was walking in a field with my wife, as you do, and a thing popped in my head. I thought, I reckon I could try to write a book. I've just got this idea for a book. And I'd never thought about that since I was about 12. And when I was 12 or 13, I thought, I was so obsessed with Stephen King, the author. I thought one day I might be like him, maybe I could start writing. And I tried and I write a few things, but eventually I moved on to music and other stuff, and I never really explored writing much after that. But then on that day, I decided, well, I'd like to explore that. And for some of you who know me already, you'll know for the past 5 years I've been exploring the idea of writing a novel. I've written 4 novels in the past 5 years. This is the first one to be published. So the road has been filled with the normal types of rejection you hear that authors have. But you know, to be honest, that's been actually pretty cool in a way. You know, like on the X Factor when someone wins and they get the Christmas #1, like after like 2 weeks or something. I quite like the idea that I had to kind of work the club circuit for a while. And it helped. It helped because at the beginning I was really quite a terrible writer. I'm a middle of the road writer now, but that's better than terrible. This book is the first in a series. The second one comes out in July, and it's being published by Allison and Busby, and it follows the story of a man called Matt Hunter. He is an ex-church minister who's turned away from God. He's got issues, cosmic issues, let's put it that way, with the idea of God, and he's become an atheist. And now he spends his time helping the police solve religiously motivated crime. And you'd actually be surprised at the amount of killers and crazy people, or just all-out people who want to murder, who would be, maybe you wouldn't be surprised, that have religious leanings. And so these books explore that sort of area, the crossover between belief. And in the first book, Purged, Matt is on the trail of a Christian serial killer who's obsessed with the ritual of baptism. So that's what this book's about, you know, as you do. Basically, I'm not giving anything away, but basically in the first chapter we discover a man who is this killer who believes that once a person is baptized, they are holy and righteous, and if they're most fit to go to heaven. And so he thinks it's doing God a favor if he is able to dispatch these people as quickly as possible before they fall away from their faith. So he's a killer with who cares in one way, but he expresses it in psychotic ways. So that's what the book's about. But I'm going to read to you. We're going to have a bit of a question and answer session, and then and later I'll be around to sign books if you want to buy a book. But you don't have to buy my book. There's loads of books out there, you know. But this is a good one. Yes, the question was, when I'm writing, there are some pretty chilling scenes in the novel, and do I creep myself out? Yeah, sometimes, especially because I'm often listening to music while I'm writing, and it may be like the soundtrack to a really creepy film. And so at the time, sometimes I'll feel a chill, but I often write in pubs or coffee shops, because I just quite like that kind of third place, getting out of the house to do it. And there's occasions where I've written parts of this book and the next one that's coming in a pub called The Checkers, which isn't too far from us, and there's just fields outside of the pub. And when I come out and I walk to my car, I'm thinking about, you know, those sorts of things. I probably should have mentioned that that chat was a bit spooky, just in case anyone needed to escape. But yeah, I do spook myself out sometimes. And also, even when I'm writing like an emotional moment, I'll find my emotions being connected with the book too. Yeah, how did I become familiar with Nigerian names? I knew some Nigerian guys when I was at Bible college. Neither of them were possessed, thankfully. Although there were times you weren't sure, but no, they were great. But I sort of knew some of the styles of their names, but then I kind of looked up on the internet to try and make sure that I was getting the names correct. When I was reading that, there was a part of me to try it and thought, well, do an accent so you can tell who the difference is, but I thought, don't do that because that sounds ridiculous. I'm terrible at accents. Why did I choose Nigeria or West Africa? One of the reasons was because within some Nigerian Christian circles, there seems to be more of an openness to the idea of witchcraft or the demonic. And so I just felt that this would be a character. Not that all Nigerians would think that, obviously, but within certain groups of that that congregation, those churches, they may be a little bit more open theologically to that, and so I thought it would be maybe a little bit more believable. But also, I just quite like the idea of exploring that culture because I find it fascinating. What a great question to hear that. Do people actually get possessed? Well, certainly within this book, and probably the continuing books, I want these books to... This sits in the crime fiction section. And so it's designed really as a book you can read as... it's purely just normal life. You know, there's no supernatural thread whatsoever. And I quite like the books that do that. Can you remember the film The Omen? Which was the kind of Protestant version of The Exorcist. The Omen I loved the film The Omen because you can read that film as a pure religious horror film, but you can also, if you watch it and just think there's no such thing as a supernatural religion, it's just a series of horrible accidents that people are misinterpreting as religious. And so I like the idea of it sort of being in between those two things. So you can read this as a supernatural element, or you can read it as a non-supernatural element. But in more answer to your question of exorcism, and possession, the Bible certainly talks about... Oh, by the way, I'm also I'm an ordained Baptist minister, so I've had a little bit of training, but I'm not an exorcist. I once wrote an article for the Daily the Daily Sport, of all places, on this subject, funnily enough, you know, as you do. And they sent me a copy of the article which said, from Britain's leading exorcist, and I'm not even an exorcist, and I've got no training whatsoever. So that's a caveat. But what I'd say to that subject is the Bible certainly talks about the idea of the devil being real and there being the potential of that. However, I think the possibilities of those happen is incredibly rare, and so it's not a surprise if you ever watch a horror movie, for example, when what often happens is somebody's getting possessed and they go to the church and the church is so reluctant to help out, and I used to think, oh, they're being so awkward, why don't they just give these people some help? It's because it's so easy to misdiagnose mental illness or someone who's troubled, or Tourette syndrome or epilepsy, and there's too many cases where people have been misdiagnosed and it's been a bad situation. So theoretically, yes, but in very rare circumstances. And on the whole, most priests and ministers, if they're presented with that, they'll tend to think it's probably another explanation, and so to always seek medical help from experts and GPs and things like that. Good question. The question was, do I feel any dilemma in writing about an ex-Christian or an atheist? No, not at all. I would have felt more dilemma writing about a current Christian in some ways because he's already a little bit like me. So I wanted to try and make him a bit different. But also, frankly, I found the idea of him having God in his past much more interesting because I like the idea of, maybe for him, God is like an old girlfriend he had, or like an old relationship that didn't work out and it had so much promise, but they just didn't, she was infuriating, or she wound him up, and for whatever reason they're over. But for, if that old girlfriend, you hear a song on the radio, or it comes to Valentine's Day and you remember her and it's painful but you're glad you moved on, I just found that an interesting dynamic to apply on a sort of cosmic level. And so for Matt, he has had a relationship with God in the past, but he's been let down. And I mean, if you read the book, you'll discover why he's been let down. You'll also discover why he's not a minister anymore. It's not as straightforward as just he decided to stop it. There's a bit more involved with that. But yeah, I just found the character interesting. And also, I personally don't think you necessarily have people who are 100% believers and 100% atheists. I think most human beings have like areas of grey. And I just find that interesting, that area. I'm a person who's sometimes grey on certain things, and I think that's what human beings are like. So I wanted to write about a human being who I was interested in. And he was an atheist. Wow, the question was, what are my key moments in the last 7 years that have made me an overnight success? Wow, well, that's a very ambitious way of putting it. And to be honest, it sounds strange, but I'm completely, it's fantastic. Books coming out, and I've got another one coming out, and I'm writing another non-fiction book at the moment that's coming out from a different publisher next year, which is a whole other story. But that's a fascinating non-fiction book. But even though I've got 3 books coming out after like 6 years of getting rejection, I'm also completely open to the possibility that these will people will buy them and then they will fade into obscurity, and that will be the end of that. And I hope that's not what happens. But if I'm open to that possibility, so it may not be a full success, but I hope it will be. But in answer to the question about key moments, I think there have been moments when you get rejected and you feel really low about it, and you just sort of think, "Cool." And I went to see the film Everest on my birthday, and I just love that image of somebody sort of going, you're climbing a mountain. If you fall down what difference does it make? You just have to keep going if you want to ascend. And so there was that relentlessness, keep going. And it was getting to the point where I'm sure friends and family might have been looking at me like, yeah, give up, you idiot. But I kept going, and so I'm delighted that the books are coming out. Do I suffer from writer's block? Not yet, but now you've said that, maybe I will. No, I don't. But that's because, in a way, I don't treat writing, for me, as a kind of like an inspirational art type thing, although I know it is for many writers, but for me it's kind of like you're supposed to just sit down at 9 in the morning and just produce something, and so I've always got this internal boss like saying, like, you wouldn't say to a plumber, fix my toilet, but he's like, well, just wait for the muse to come. Like, no, like, fix the toilet, I need to go. And so I've always had that internal boss that's just saying, there's no excuse, you've just got to do it. And that doesn't mean there's not moments when it's hard, but there's no opt-out to say I'm not going to do that today. So I suppose I haven't had writer's block yet, but of course it could come. I hope not, but might. When I start writing a book, do I know how it's going to end? Not always. Sometimes the endings slightly change. But I'm not a person. I know some authors who they have no idea what's going to happen and they write along. But I guess I'm a bit more of a planner. So I'll flesh out a certain idea, and then I'll go back and then I'll add detail in and detail. So I normally have a rough idea of what's going to happen. But every now and again, it's a bit disconcerting. Like I'll be writing something and a character may just suddenly in my head do something I really didn't expect, and I'll just record that and write that down as the sort of stenographer being present. So sometimes it goes in areas, and also sometimes it changes because I read it back and it's just rubbish and it doesn't work, and you go, wow, this is like really boring. And that's one of the really helpful things about having like editors. And Joanna, that's my agent over there. Say hi to Joanna. And this is Susie from the publishers, from Allison and Busby. And having people like that who can come in and on a professional level just say, this isn't working, change that, I find really, really helpful. So sometimes the narratives can change, but that's okay because it's kind of like a group project in some ways. Is Matt autobiographical? At first he wasn't necessarily supposed to be, but and I tried to. I thought I was making him really different to me because I've made him quite a science fiction geek, and he has Yoda slippers, and he loves Star Wars, and he's a Star Trek guy. And then I suddenly realized, look. Like this is my birthmark. This is my bookmark, and it's Captain Kirk from Star Trek. And I was like, and I honestly thought that was different from me, but so there are aspects of him like me, and in some ways that could be classed as really quite lazy, and I'm quite happy to accept that. But I spent quite a while trying to write a book that was about a policeman, because that tends to be the more kind of popular crime fiction book. And so I thought, I try and work out what policemen do. And I just found the hierarchical structures of police work so baffling. And that's just like a straightforward thing. And I don't even know what's a sergeant and a corporal and all this stuff. I thought, this is such an uphill, I couldn't work it out. And there was such an uphill struggle. I thought, well, why not just write about stuff I know? And I thought, again, with Stephen King so often will write about characters who are writers. And I never, when I read his stuff, go, oh, how lazy is Steve? You just think, wow, it's Stephen King. And so, yeah, I thought, just write about what I know. And so there's obviously going to be a bit of crossover there. But I'm not fully like him. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I'd actually forgotten about that. Yes, yes, music fans. I've always, when I was younger, when I used to read a novel, sometimes I would think, oh, cool, wouldn't it be cool to write a soundtrack, an orchestral soundtrack, a music soundtrack to the novel? So I wrote a lot of like sort of Pulp Fiction, scary books that I'd read when I was younger. I'd write a whole soundtrack to it, and then I just a little while ago thought, well, it would be good to write a whole soundtrack album to Purged. And so I did. So I wrote, there's a full score. You don't have to listen to it while you're reading the book, but it's streaming free now on Bandcamp. You can find that out on my website, peterlaws.co.uk. But I've always been I always loved music, and when I was younger, like, it was one of the things I would love to have done is write music for soundtracks, and so it's been fun to combine those two things. Yes, that was questions about did I do any research into the police and how they handle cases. Yes, I did. But especially what I did was I got a policeman friend to read through the book, and he was able to say, you can't just walk into a house unless the door's open, and all these details I had no idea. And so he was really helpful in that. So one of the police officers is named after him. So as a sort of thank you to what he did. In terms of characters, do I look at people around me? Yeah. Yes, sometimes. And to be honest, when I'm in, because I do a lot of writing in public places, like occasionally I'll be like, son, I need someone who's nerdy. And I'll look up guys who are nerdy, but there, I'll get him and I'll write it down. Usually it's me in the window. Or maybe there's some inspiration that I need from somebody. But on the whole, they become like composites. I don't know about you, but when I read a book, and I don't mean my book, but any book, I almost have like an ensemble cast, which I bring back out, and they keep slotting into the roles of the books I read. And so they kind of slotted into this book as well, to some extent. Although I'm not fully sure what Matt looks like. Sometimes I have images of him in my head, but yes, inspiration does come from others, but not always. Right, there's a character called Chris Kelly who is a very strong evangelical Christian, and he's a sort of like, whoa, praise the Lord type guy. I've met plenty of people who are a little bit like the character Chris Kelly, and I have quite a lot of affection for those types of people too. But I only went to start going to church when I was like 21, and so for the first half of my life I had nothing to do with Christians, and so I still have that other half of me that looks at the sort of the full-on, born again evangelical type and think, oh my word, they're crazy. But of course, I'm a Christian myself, so I'm in that camp now. But yeah, so he was a kind of a composite, I suppose, of those different people, and recognizing that, people can meet a Christian and be kind of freaked out by them at first. And that's what he is, a bit freaky. I was just asked, I don't know what Matt Hunter looks like, but who would I like to play him? There's an audiobook being made of Purged and the next book, Unleashed, which is exciting. And I was asking people, I wonder who would be asked to do that. My brother said, well, Joe Pasquale, obviously. I was like, no. What he would look like. Tom Cruise. When I was doing the edits of this, I was watching The Night Manager on TV. And I did have Tom Hiddleston in my head as just being like, that's who I was thinking of. But I don't know. Sometimes, like, if you say what the person looks like, it imposes something on the reader's ensemble cast. So there's not a great deal of description of who these people are in some ways, of who the important people are, so that the reader can they can pick out their leading man and drop him in.
A huge thank you to Peter Laws.
Thank you, everybody.